3 p.m. to call to order this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee of the San Lorenzo Valley Water District. Will the secretary take the roll?
Jeff Hill,
Here.
Brian Largate,
Here.
Bob Retz,
Here.
Mike Galvin.
Here.
All right, and then Jim Mosier already let us know he wasn't going to be here, but we do have a quorum.
Okay, do we have any changes to the agenda?
No.
Seeing none. Let me make sure I've got the ability to take a look at the gallery here and see if we have anybody else. I don't see anyone else online. Okay. Oral communications. This portion of the meeting reserved for oral communications by the public for items which are not on the agenda. California law, the Brown Act limits what the board can do regarding issues during oral communications. No action or discussion may occur on issues outside of those already on today's agenda. Any person may address the committee at this time on any subject that lies within the jurisdiction of the district. Normally, presentations must not exceed 5 minutes in length, and individuals may only speak once during all communications. Any director may request that a matter be placed on a future agenda, or staff may be directed to provide a brief response. I do not see any members of the public here, and I don't see any online. So we'll move on to new business. First item on new business is election of the committee chair. And I'm going to nominate Brian.
Oh, really?
Well, it has to be you or me.
I know.
You nominate each other. There you go.
Oh, Jeff.
And then those guys get to decide.
Should we do rock, paper, scissors?
Okay.
Did we talk about this? Did say something about this? Like,
No.
oh man. If I need to be the chair, I can be the chair. You know, my work is more than full time, and it's quite difficult for me to, as you could see, make it here on time, let alone fully manage it.
So
but I recognize that you
nominate me.
Are you sure?
Yes, go
Is
ahead.
that okay? Oh, thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. I would love to nominate you, Jeff,
Thank you.
if you'd be willing.
Do we have any other nominations? No. Would the secretary call a vote?
Yeah, sure. Well, since Brian was nominated, I guess you don't really, or Jeff was nominated, you don't get to vote, huh? Okay, so Brian Largate.
So the measure we're voting on is whether you will serve, Jeff will serve.
You have moved that.
I've moved that you serve.
that I
Great,
serve,
thanks very much.
Yeah.
I'm still learning how all this works. Yes, I will vote in the affirmative for that
Okay.
proposition. Thank
Bob.
For Jeff as well.
Okay, and Mike.
For Jeff.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Alright.
Jeff.
That is
Okay.
unanimous.
That is our new.
Thank you for the
Chair.
courtesy of
Yes.
suggesting that I would be appropriate.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is Budget Primer 101. Our financial consultant, Heather, will be presenting this.
Good afternoon, committee. I am Heather Ipoletti, finance consultant to the district. I am a senior advisor with Regional Government Services. What I'm going to do is this at committee member, board member Largate's request. This is what I'm going to call a budget 101, budget primer, whatever you want to call it. It is essentially a overview of the budget process and a little bit about the district's financials that I think is kind of like the bottom line, the basics of knowledge that is kind of needed to understand the financial information I'm going to be presenting to you over the next year, as well as the proposed budget, which I'm going to be presenting in a month. So I'm going to get started. First, I want to share some facts about the district, and then we'll get into a PowerPoint that I will speed through. If you have questions throughout, do me a favor, speak up, ask them as I'm going through. I am happy to ask as we go through. And otherwise, I'm going to kind of speed through so we are not here all night long. And I can talk about finances and budget and numbers all night long. So that's why I kind of just kind of fly through.
Heather?
First, yes.
I was just testing, so if we have a question midstream, just speak up like that and you'll
Please,
hear us. and
just
stop.
speak up.
Okay, great.
Yell my name. I'm good with that. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I look at this as kind of like a casual discussion. All right. And I mean, the idea is it's a learning opportunity. And so if you're not able to ask questions as I'm giving it to you, I don't think you're going to learn as much. And so I want to make sure you guys kind of, you're not going to become CPAs in the next hour, but I'm hoping you'll at least get some basics of the district's numbers. Okay. The district adopted its first biennial budget in June of 21. You ask, what is a biennial budget? A biennial budget is 2 one-year budgets. It is not a 2-year budget. It is 2 one-year budgets. So they only essentially go through that adoption process every other year, not every year. In both cities that I worked at, I implemented this process. Though we're still looking at the budgets, we're analyzing, are we over? It allows for staff to actually do some deeper analysis, ideally in those off years. Because otherwise you literally go from audit straight into that adoption process, and there's no breathing room and there really is no time for deep analysis. So that's what that biennial budget does. And it also hopefully gets the district thinking a little more long-term other than that short 12-month period. So that's what the biennial budget does, some benefits. The
Heather,
district, please.
Does that mean the next time the district will consider a budget after this go around will be 2027?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. The proposed budget that you will see in April is for the fiscal year 25-26 and 26-27. So you'll then have to adopt another at least 1-year budget by June 30th of 27. Okay?
Thank you.
No, please. Like I say, I love the questions. The district operates an enterprise fund. And once we get to the reserve policy, you're going to see where that really applies and makes a difference. There's a governmental fund in addition to these two I'm going to talk about. There's many others, but there's a governmental fund and there's an enterprise fund. Governmental fund is literally just like a city government's general fund where they get that property tax revenue, that sales tax revenue, and normally like police, fire, and general government is paid for out of that. And that city government relies on that property tax revenue, that sales tax revenue, possibly some TOT revenue to pay for the majority of its city services. This is a water district with a sewer fund also. You rely significantly upon user rates to pay for your government activities. You get a little bit of property tax revenue, you get a little bit of cell tower rents, but the majority of your income is received from your residents paying for utility rates. And the financial statements are very different between a governmental fund and an enterprise fund. An enterprise fund's financial statements look a little bit closer to that business where you have, your assets and your long-term liabilities are sitting on your balance sheet. For a governmental fund, all of your debt payments, all of your cost of assets, that all runs through your income statement. Very, very different, okay? And I'll go into a little bit deeper into that discussion again when we get to the reserve policy. Keep in mind, you are an enterprise fund. Your financial statements, because you are an enterprise fund, are on accrual. That means that the expenses that are recorded in your books are based on the period in which the service was provided, not when you pay it. Governmental fund isn't like that. It's not on accrual. Okay. And it's not cash basis where it's about when you pay it, but the financial statements are based on accrual. The budget, we want it to be as close to cash as reasonably possible. When I say reasonably, I'm not going to look at every single expense and figure out when it's going to be paid, but there are some things that are included in the expense part of your budget that wouldn't normally be. But because we want it to be on that cash basis, because a budget, I have some special words. It is a resource. It is a plan for the use of your resources. Okay. It will not agree to your financial statements. You don't want it to agree to your financial statements. You want to be able to manage that cash. The internal process for your budget process really starts in January. I have been working with your management team on their budget. I pretty much started in February, maybe late January, early February, for them to give me their what's called a department request budget. I am now analyzing those budgets for reasonableness, things like that. It's not Christmas. They don't get to ask for their wants. It's about needs, okay? It's about fiscal responsibility. You're managing, this district is managing public funds. So I look at their budget requests for reasonableness. I compare it to prior years. They don't get to assume a 25%, CPI inflator, things like that. Those are the sort of things I'm looking at. And believe me, in the past years, not from this district, I've seen that. So that internal process starts in January. I'm going to bring what it would be referred to as department request / proposed budget to this committee in April for this committee's input. I'm then going to take that input, revise that budget, and the board will then get their first look at the budget in May. Ideally, the first meeting in May, that is my plan. But adoption has to be done by June 30th. So when I look at that, that means the public will have an opportunity for input on the district's budget no less than 5 times. So 2 committees, this budget and finance committee and the environmental committee. One of the other committees, I might be getting the name wrong, is looking at the CIPs, I believe, next week.
I think it's engineering.
Engineering.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Engineering. Thank you. The engineering committee is looking at the proposed CIP list. I want to say on the 19th. Yeah, on the 19th. So at least 2 committee meetings and 3 board meetings. Any questions before I move on?
So real quick, you guys know when she uses the acronym CIP, she's talking capital improvement project.
Yep. All right. I'll say that's really where, that's the biggest part of your budget is your CIP. There's some operational expenses I'll talk about later on when I get into this PowerPoint that I'm about to start up. But
And that's why
yeah.
the engineering committee, that's the committee that queues up the capital projects.
Yeah.
Yep. The engineering manager and the rest of the operations team and management staff are providing the engineering committee a proposed 5-year CIP. And the first 2 years will be included in the budget. The remaining 3 years is for planning purposes. But and again, it's a proposed CIP to get the input from the committee. Right. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint. We're going to go through. Actually, here we go. And I'm going to try to hide some things. There we go. All right. Can you guys give me some feedback? Can you see this PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. What is a budget? We talked about that already. It is a plan for the use of resources. It is not about financial statements. It is a plan for the use of resources. It is a policy document. It's most people would say it's the most important policy document the district will adopt. It is supposed to show the board priorities. It is a plan for how to record expenditures. It is a guide to determine who can spend how much via departments or operations versus capital. It's also a communication tool to inform your public on how their money is being spent and what is being done with it. Again, it is a resource allocation plan. There are primarily 4 types of budgeting. There's zero-based budgeting, where you essentially ignore what's been done in the past and you start from 0 and go up. There is performance-based budgeting, where you're budgeting based on metric. That was very popular years ago, and I'll say that it's easier said than done. And then there is a program budget, where you kind of allocate lump sum monies to programs. Line item budgets are for sure the most popular, and I'd say the most useful. And I won't say that you take all your line items and you increase them by an inflator of 3%. It doesn't work that way. I mean, my finance budgets, I can tell you exactly what is in each line and go from there. My goal is to present you line item budgets by department, and I have an explanation from the managers who did these budgets. And then again, I looked at them critically, but I have an explanation as to why they're increasing or if they're decreasing. And so our budget or the district's budget that will be presented will be a line item budget. The district is always in budget mode. Budget gets adopted, and we're always looking at budget actuals on a monthly basis in the finance status report. The district provides the board a budget to actual report of reconciled numbers on a monthly basis. And we talked about also the official budget process starting in January with adoption in June. It's always ongoing. We're always looking at it. The finance department's bringing budget amendments to the board if something was not included in the budget, and if staff cannot find a way to fund it by maybe reducing one line item and increasing another, they will take something to the board. Lately, most likely, if a budget amendment comes to the board, it's related to a capital improvement project. But the point to take away from this is the district is always in budget mode.
Heather, is there a threshold for when a budget revision is triggered, or when we revisit that sort of thing? Like if it was $1 overage versus something, you know?
I know there is definitely not a threshold. You can move. There's something called an administrative budget amendment, where the general manager will have responsibilities or authority to move budget from one line item to another. But it's more about, and because you really only have one fund, it's more about, are you going to go over that overall budget at year end? So at year end, if it's an operational item and at year end, you're staying within the overall appropriations approved by the board, a budget amendment operationally is not usually needed. And that's different from a CIP. I mean, unfortunately, we're taking budget amendments to the board for, $400,000. If a project is over budget by $400,000, that's something to bring to the board's attention. And it's not necessarily that they're out of compliance with their budget. It's to be, in my opinion, it's more about transparency and keeping the board and the public informed about what's going on with their projects. But for operational budgets, as long as an estimate to close for that year is got it to where the budget is coming under the overall appropriations, budget amendment should not be needed. But also keep in mind that purchasing, the district can't spend on any one item purchasing on enter into a contract or enter or purchase some goods, let's say a tractor, for more than 30,000 without bringing it to the board's approval. And in that staff memo, there's a fiscal section. Was this item budgeted or not should be in that section. So if you're not staying within approved appropriations, that should be documented and therefore a budget amendment proposed.
Thank
So
you.
Heather, a quick comment. It's where we have seen this most over the last couple of years is a capital improvement project with a contractor. We're looking at the contract before it's being, before it's been approved. And staff knows that it's going to run over what was originally budgeted for that. And they will propose to us that we pull money from reserves to cover that or pull it from some other project.
Correct.
So
in the time that I've been working with the district, there's been many times where I've gone, okay, what's going on with this project? Because if we don't need this money, can we move it on to this? So we're not having to dip into reserves.
Yeah.
You're staying within your appropriations.
Yeah. The staff typically proposes to the board where if they're going to run over over what was budgeted before we approve the contract, the staff typically proposes to us where that money is going to come from. Sometimes it's reserved, sometimes it's some other project. Yep,
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Heather, I just had I guess a more generalized question about the budget process.
Yep.
I understand that the line item is useful, especially if you're talking about sort of status quo operations, right? Then you're looking at what each department manager is used to managing and what kinds of things might change. Obviously, having 2 years to look at it means you've got to look out into the future a little more.
Yeah.
And so that would be kind of an issue. But I guess my question is, in a way, if the board says, hey, our objectives for the next 2 years are X, Y, and Z, are the department managers then taking those objectives and saying, okay, so given those new objectives, now my budget needs to be A, B, and C. How are the objectives of the board, I guess, rolled into budgets going forward?
Pretty much what you said, but ideally, keep in mind, the staff is going to have a basic budget to keep the operations running, right? A lot of that's not going to change. No matter what the specific projects that the board might have to say. I'm going to throw out a couple projects. Let's say they want to go out for bond for projects. Okay, that could be a direction, and then the staff would be directed to add those related expenses into the budget. If they're looking to increase fire hydrant flow, and I'm just throwing stuff out there. Okay, I'm not an engineer. I'm just using words that I've heard. Okay, let's say the board says, to increase fire hydrant flow. That's a CIP. So that would mean that the staff would be directed to formulate what it would cost to do that and present to that board for consideration. But if you think about a budget of running a company or running a government agency, there is certain basic items that we have to do. I've seen it referred to as a giant iceberg. Okay. You've got this giant iceberg, but you can only see a small portion of it on the top. That's the stuff that a lot of people care about. But that stuff down below is what's really important. And that's the basics of your budget. That will be what is presented to the board, well, to you guys. And then it'll, if that after that first meeting, if the board has additional direction, and keep in mind, I'm also working with the general manager to receive information if he gets any information from the board regarding the budget as well. But I'd say that basic budget has nothing to do with the board's strategic plan other than to keep water flowing, clean water, processed the way the state says, to process wastewater, things like that. That answer your question?
Partly, and I guess actually what it makes me wonder to the two board members here is, are there a list of strategies that the board has come up that it says this is important to us as a water district for the next few years, so that you then hand it over to engineering, and maybe it's hydrant flow, it's maybe it's applying AI for finding leaks. I mean, just all kinds of what ifs. Are there those kinds of sort of 2 to 5 years?
We have a
strategic
fairly
goals?
substantial list of capital improvement projects. Some of this comes from a major engineering study that was done back around 2017, which listed a whole bunch of projects, and we're partway through that list. Places where we had, 50-year-old pipe that was not, 4-inch pipe where we needed a 10-inch pipe,
Right.
or where it was old materials that were breaking down, or where the population has changed. The district has a lot of, this district has over the years merged in with and brought in other smaller water companies and stuff. And so we have a lot of places where we really need to improve the facilities. And so we have a fairly long list of that. Like I said, we're working through it, but that's a major part of the direction that ends up going into the budget, as opposed to what Heather was saying, day-to-day fixing of leaks and
Just
and
regular stuff. Yeah.
running the office and sending out bills and things like that. It's pretty straightforward.
But I assume these engineering studies, which are would be very long-term, right? Those would be available to take a look at.
Yeah, most of them. Yeah.
Most, okay.
Yeah, so my understanding of the way that will work during this budgeting season is that the engineering committee will receive recommendations from staff as to the list of capital improvement projects from like the 2021 master plan is a good place to look if you want to see a big laundry list of these projects, of where of how far down the list we'll get. And they'll probably come up with more dollars worth of projects than can be realistically accomplished.
Of course.
And
Yeah.
then the task first for the engineering committee, but then for the full board will be to review and prioritize on of that list of projects.
Yeah.
How often does that happen?
Maybe towards more tanks or more pipes or more hydrants, but in all likelihood, it'll be some of everything, just because that's the most
The network.
need.
Yeah.
How often does that, prioritization happen with the board for the list of projects? I imagine, you think it was mentioned they're looking, 5 years out. You have the master plan, which probably goes longer than that. How often do you guys sit and be like, okay, like what is the most pressing priority right now? Can we bump something up or, delay something?
So a major part of that is done in the budgeting process here. We have engineering and staff right now looking at the list and saying, what is most urgent? What is affordable? What can we get done within such and such a time? And their job is to pull together a priority list for us then based on, like I said, is it, is it a huge fire hazard that we don't have enough water in this neighborhood? There was one neighborhood down in Ben Lomond that had a defective pipe had been put in years ago, and they kept springing leaks, and so that bumped up because it was ruining the road, and so basically that's kind of the core of the capital portion of this budget is this prioritization, and it's very important.
Right. And so some of the other considerations that seem to be at the there's will be some engineering committee consideration of it, and then some consideration by our committee is of this list of projects, what are likely to be eligible for FEMA reimbursement, what are well suited to a debt service to borrow money to pay to build, and then what are there any that could be eligible to grants or other financing strategies. And I'm still trying to understand how we make all of those tactical decisions, about how we sort the projects by their funding feasibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Okay. After all of those 5-6 meetings regarding the budget and it gets adopted, a budget document is created. That budget document will include a transmittal letter, maybe list strategic budget priorities, a reserve summary. Again, we'll expand on that discussion. Revenue and expenditure summaries. It'll also include expenses by department, hopefully with some metrics or performance measures. What essentially is what essentially are the customers getting for this money? That's what I'm hoping to be able to include in this budget document. Personnel detail, maybe some financial policies, as well as adopting resolutions. All of these items listed are what is recommended by the GFOA, Governmental Finance Officers Association.
Great. Heather, if I could, for our two non-board members here, clarify one thing also. We have two labor agreements, one with management staff and one with the rank and file. And in the last negotiations, which was over a year ago, we agreed to, for example, hire a consulting firm that specializes in this area to look at the pay scales that we offer compared with a selected list of similar districts in the general region here. And we just recently received that list, and staff will be meeting with the two labor groups to discuss what adjustments need to be made in pay. And our agreement with them was that we would be looking at not being the highest pay and not being the lowest pay, but being approximately in the middle of comparable districts. So that's one way that there's input into the budget.
And just for my understanding, about how many people in each of the labor groups?
Well, there's about 35 or so employees, and 38.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Close enough for
okay.
enough for government work.
And are all 38 then covered, or is it just certain set?
Well, the general manager has his own contract. Heather is a private contract employee. We contract for her services as a consultant. I think the management group is 4 or 5 people, and then the rest of them are all
probably each of the department heads. And,
department heads.
Finance person. Well, she's the finance.
If she was on staff, she would be in that group.
Okay.
And then the rest of them are all on the
Classified.
labor.
Even part-timers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Covers everyone.
All right. It's good to know. Thank you.
Go
All right.
ahead.
I have a little note here that staff thinks the budget is theirs. In reality, it's the board's budget. In
Mhm.
reality, staff just follows the budget for which the board approves and adopts a resolution. So that's an important point to make.
Yeah.
All right. Again, remember we talked about at the beginning that the water district is an enterprise fund. The enterprise fund is used to account for the operations that are financed and operated in a manner similar to a private business enterprise. And it's funded with the cost, the rates that the consumers pay for the service. Okay. This is a copy of something that was straight out of the 23, 24, 24, 25 budget. You know, you have a reserve balance, you have plus revenues, less expenses, less capital projects. You've got an ending reserve balance. We're going to talk further about that, but this is something similar to this is what you'll see me present in April with a whole lot more details. But straight from a budget document, the revenues from the district, we have water and sewer charges. Those are those Proposition 218 utility rates. We've got some capital grants that help us pay for capital projects. We do get some property tax revenue, some rent and lease revenue, interest revenue, some assessment revenue, and then bond proceeds to pay
Okay,
for
Heather, if I could-
capital projects only. Go ahead.
Could I interrupt for just a second? This
Yep.
building belongs to the district. So the other people that work out of this building are paying rent to the district.
Gotcha.
We have also one Verizon cell tower on district property, and they're paying us for that. And we're negotiating for a second one.
Gotcha.
So,
That's part of the non-operating
Yeah.
revenues.
yeah, so I
Right.
mean,
Rents and
there's
leases.
rent, but it's not a lot.
Yep, every little bit helps.
All right. I wanted to give you a perspective because just looking at 1 year's worth of numbers to me is just a bunch of numbers. But when you compare it from year to year, that gives you a little bit more perspective over the amount. That property tax revenue I said wasn't much, but it is $1 million, so it does add up. You see in 2024, we spent a little over 13 million in bond proceeds. There's not much of that left, less than 700,000. And we also received a little over 2 million in capital grants. That also includes some FEMA, but mostly non-FEMA money.
So Heather, if I just looked at that, you're saying about 25 million in bonds have been, I guess, issued in total, and we've gotten what, 3.5 million or so of grants?
As in, if you're
Over that
adding up those
timeframe?
5 years, yes,
Yes.
yes,
So-
yes.
And so the grants are free and clear, but if the bonds are debt and they do have to be repaid.
Yes.
The bonds are no different to the district than maybe a mortgage, right? You instead of monthly, you pay twice a year. But yeah,
Okay.
30, sometimes it's 25 years, sometimes it's 30 years, but look at it as kind of like a mortgage.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. They
And
just
those-
call it bond proceeds, loan proceeds. In reality, when a government agency issues a large loan like that, it's behind the scenes. It's a bond where people can actually, sometimes there's what's called private placement loans where you actually go to a bank and they give you the money similar to like if a business goes, but a lot of times those bonds go out to market. And I mean, you as a resident or me, we could possibly buy some district debt as an investment.
And I assume that those bonds and the grants all stemmed from the CZU fire. Is that?
I would not make that assumption.
Okay, well, that's important to
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, in
Definitely
fact-
not.
Oh,
in fact,
okay,
most of them do not tie to the CZU fire.
really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most of the bonds are mostly based on the capital master plan, the district master plan, which was based on an engineering survey of the facilities and stuff back,
Gotcha.
2017
2017. Okay.
time frame.
Yeah.
And, bonds and anyway, we borrowed money for that.
Okay.
And I'll say, and I'll say this, they are not different from other agents, other water district agencies,
Yeah.
or even local government.
Mhm.
Do large projects, you end up issuing debt.
Yeah.
So
Right.
it's about
No,
managing your debt, but they're not different.
Right, and that interest rates of 2.5% to 3%, that's a bargain.
Correct,
Yeah,
correct.
The other thing too, the bonds are tied to specific projects. So there's each one of those pieces of debt that we have a list of projects attached to
so
them.
they're restricted.
Yes, they're restricted.
Correct. By the board, by a board resolution. They
Yeah.
don't always have to be. It could be more general and as
Mhm.
long as it's a capital project. But
Yeah.
this board, when when they went out to debt, they chose create a list of projects and
Mhm.
and restrict them to certain projects.
And so these were sourced by the state or federal government? They weren't-
Neither.
Neither.
You yeah, neither. You normally hire a bond underwriter and a fiscal consultant. They work together with the district or an agency, and it actually goes out to market. These are not state or federal debt.
Okay,
These are market rate bonds.
these are market rate bonds, okay. I didn't-
Correct.
Appreciate that, thank you.
Normally tax exempt though.
Mhm.
So, all right. So again, this is the revenue portion of their budget. Projecting revenues is an art. Sometimes it's formula based, sometimes it's professional judgment. Sometimes you can see a trend, sometimes you can truly see where it's going to go. But I'll say it's an educated guess most of the time. Okay. But when I do revenue projections, I definitely I document and share with the board when I'm presenting the budget, my assumptions, so that it's really clear about how I came to the numbers that I came to.
It is fair to comment that the population of the San Lorenzo Valley is pretty stable. And, so while water usage does go up and down somewhat, water usage is fairly stable. If we have a drought year or something like that. So I can imagine other types of governments where it would be much more of a guess.
Yeah.
Than we've had.
Yeah. Okay.
Where we, so many units of water at such and such a rate. And you can pretty well come and have some boundaries on it. It's never going to go above this. It's never going to go below that unless there's some major disaster.
Right, and I assume we'll, maybe not today, but at some future point, we'll see what the projections are, given the new rate structure, right?
Yes.
And I'm kind of assuming half of it now is fixed, and then half is actual due to water usage, but I don't know.
Yeah,
That's just
it's
an off the cuff guess.
a large portion of it. You'll see my revenue projections for the next 2 years. April 9th, when I present to you the proposed budget.
Okay,
I will go through that with you.
that's
Okay.
great.
That is my plan. A lot to do between now and then, but that is my plan.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's highly unlikely that we're going to sell 25% more water or 25% less water, barring
Yeah.
massive disaster of
Something
some
really
sort.
big,
Okay. Expenditures for besides CIP or capital improvement your capital improvement program, parentheses CIP. Your biggest expense is your personnel. You got your salaries and your benefits. And then you've got operations and maintenance, and then your capital. Let's see. Included in operations and maintenance is insurance. When you're trying to predict these, some are straight lines, some are based on contracts, some are, yeah, but staff is definitely the lion's share, and I have a detailed projection of that. This is a 5-year expense picture by expense category.
What would facilities, the $750,000 number, that's not rent, it's what would that represent?
It could be facility maintenance, it could be utilities. It could be water, but it's usually about maintaining your, your actual, not like the water pipes or anything like that, but it's your buildings, your actual buildings.
How many buildings, does the district own? Or how many square feet, do you know?
I do not know offhand, but it's something that I can make sure that I know
Okay.
next
so
month.
most of what the building owns is, or the district owns, is this building. And for example, this wasn't really being used for much of anything. And this last year, this whole room was remodeled so that we could use it as a boardroom and for public meetings and things.
Yeah.
So, all the ceiling stuff and the paint on the walls and stuff. There's the district headquarters, which is the building down on Highway 9 there that has a sign on it that says Water District. And we spent about $13,500 this year on replacing the siding in the front and the window frames and painting it because it was literally rotting away. And then the building across the street from that has operations in there and a whole bunch of other stuff that's in that building.
Okay.
And other than that, I don't think we have any other buildings per se.
We
We've got,
have Felton Acres, we have, line treatment plant, prairie treatment
yeah,
plant.
we've got some
pre-water
treatment
treatment
plants.
Pump stations,
Yeah,
there's other facilities, we have the Quail Hollow facility, which is like a corporate yard, which has 2 wells and a pump station.
yeah, there's a building down by Zayante, at
Yeah,
the bottom of Quail Hollow.
That's
Yeah.
the old Zany firehouse back in the day, and it's very, very dilapidated. The county years ago wanted it because they're gonna replace that bridge and make it so they can pull in and out easier for the big trucks. That hasn't come to fruition for whatever
In
money
terms
or
of-
whatever reasons.
Yeah, so in terms of buildings where people work though,
Right.
it's the 3 that I listed primarily.
Yes.
And the rest of them are like pump stations are oftentimes automated
Right.
and remote and
The 2 treatment facilities.
treatment plants, you have people
staff
working there.
Those are substantial. Okay. Yeah, I just didn't know. I just wanted a sense of what's $750,000 a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great.
No, and I'll go into detail next month when I present the budget about what is in each one of these lines. And I'll also present the information by department versus by expense type.
Heather, who has final ownership over staffing requirements? Is that the board?
Staffing requirements? What do you mean by,
Yeah.
as in whether additional staff get hired or not? That is the board.
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, to be honest, it's the board via the budget. It's when this budget gets adopted, there's a list of authorized positions that are related to this budget. And the general manager then has the a non-interim general manager then has the authority to hire any of those positions when they become vacant. Okay, to go out and do a proper recruitment. If he wanted to upgrade one of those positions, let's say from a manager to a director, something like that, that would increase the cost, and therefore he'd have to go back to the board and get board authorization and a budget amendment and a change to that authorized positions listing.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Sure. All right, projecting expenses. We talked a little bit about that. Sometimes it's MOU salary increases. There's increased benefit costs, health insurance, CalPERS, step increases, per the MOU. Some staff are getting annual increases, full-time versus part-time vacancies, assumptions related to that, and then overtime trends, as well as overtime and standby pay are items. It lists extraordinary events, like let's call it a fire, a disaster. The assumption is that none of that will happen. So if that does happen, there's a good possibility that a budget amendment may need to happen if people are working, 24 hours a day, for 7 days straight, right? So the assumption is it's going to go, on that trend, a normal trend for things like overtime pay. You've got operations and maintenance. You go by history. Sometimes it's inflation. Sometimes you look at contracts. But again, when I present the budget next month, and I'll go line by line for each department, I'll talk about what lines I've used an inflator or staff has used an inflator, and what lines we've changed based on different things. So the budget is adopted. Now what? As we talked about earlier, we're always in budget mode. We are always looking at revenues. Are they coming in accordance to projections? Are the expenditures on track? Monthly budget to actual comparisons. And I'm always looking at the CIPs. Are they, when I see expenses on a monthly basis, are they for budgeted CIPs or new CIPs? Things like that. And then if something comes up that the board wants to implement mid-budget year, it's a matter of staff bringing to them a budget amendment and revising the budget and discussing about possible funding sources. So we look at revenues. Timing of receipts, that's a good one to look at. For many agencies, non-water district wise, property tax is a large component of your revenue. We really only get our property tax twice a year, in December, right around Christmas time, and April and June. So we have to look at timing of receipts when we're looking at cash flow as well, and keep that in mind. We're always looking at that. We're paying attention to cash flow. And again, we're pulling reports and doing things throughout the year to track revenues as well as expenses, and looking at our cash flow. That applies the same thing. Doing budget to actuals. If something is, in July, 75% of the budget, we need to know why. One thing is we pay our workers' comp and our general liability insurance, as well as a CalPERS portion, in July. Those are all three large numbers. To smooth things out, what I've done is, for the budget to actual reports, I've allocated them out monthly, and staff does a monthly journal entry to try to smooth that out for budget to actuals. But those are the sort of things that staff needs to know when they're analyzing their budget to actual numbers. All right, capital planning, capital budgets. We've talked a lot about that already, and where the capital projects come from. There is a long list, and I'm looking forward to the engineering committee's input from that. Yeah, we've talked a lot about that, so I'm going to just speed by. And best laid plans. Someone once told me that you can adopt a budget on June 30th, and by July 1st, it's out of date. It is an estimate. It is a plan. It requires constant looking at it and to see if it needs to be adjusted based on direction provided by the board. And then there's the emergencies: COVID, wildfires, and winter storms. This agency has no short supply, unfortunately, of disasters that kind of mess with your budget. So that's when you circle back and do budget amendments as needed. The general manager has some authority typically at that fund level, increase and decrease between line items. appropriations, that's essentially your budget, your total budget. For the total fund is for a fiscal year. If you don't spend that money, you do not carry it over into the next year. The excess goes into reserves and, but it's called lapsing, the appropriations lapse. You cannot carry budget from one year to the other. And any additional questions? You guys are quiet. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Fell asleep.
We're all stunned.
So when we look at the, Heather, when we look at the budget, so the existing fiscal 23 to 25 budget is on our website, and it has the front matter that you described, and then these various tables, the 5-year comparisons, and then some of these maybe 4 or 5 tables. That's it, right? That's like the bulk of the approval is at this pretty high level. So there's, you know, personnel is just one number per year, and operating grants is just one number per year. We're not going into any of the finer details of that. That's all done at the staff level.
Not necessarily. Your numbers are like, if you dig deeper into that budget, you're going to see those personnel numbers by department. So you're going to see it by department. And then I am happy to discuss, you know, when I present the proposed budget, I'm happy to discuss what's in those salaries and benefit numbers. So if you look in that budget document, it actually goes in a decent amount of detail on what's, because it goes to into the, at least the department level.
That's right. Yep, I'm seeing that now. Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. Mm-hmm.
And,
Okay.
and
Yep.
that's how I plan on presenting the budget at the department level. I'll give you summary numbers as well, but I plan on presenting the budget at the department level so that you can see personnel, you can see, you know, operations, you can see, you know, you'll have more information than you want. And I'll verbally discuss what is in each number. So, you know, after I'm done presenting that proposed budget, everybody will go, okay, I am so done talking about numbers. So you will get a lot of information next month when I present that proposed budget. I'm not sure how it's been presented in the past, if it's been presented down to that level. Jeff, would you like to?
I've been present for one presentation, annual presentation. And I would say it was fairly high level.
Okay.
And not anywhere near the level of detail I would have liked.
Yeah. So I'm gonna present by department and then pull it all into a summary.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is my plan.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's just the way I've always done it. And I think it's important for the public as well as the board to see it at that level.
Yeah. So before you were brought on board, we, within a period of less than a year, probably went through 2 different finance directors.
Okay.
And of varying levels of skill. And so the budget presentation I saw was not done with anywhere near the depth of understanding that Heather's going to give us.
Yeah.
And I hope that's
I mean,
all.
yeah, I just think it's necessary. It takes time. It really does. We're already at an hour with the 3 other items I have to present won't take an hour each, I promise. But I'm yeah, I'm hoping that when I'm able to present the budget to the board, at least, that we're able to keep the agendas light. So that we're not presenting late at night or anything like that. I've done that once, and I don't recommend that for anybody's sake, especially mine. You know, after 9 o'clock, I don't want to talk numbers. But I do want to be able to share the details. Hi.
Hi, Heather. I just had, I guess we'll be getting into the reserves and stuff a little later, right?
We will, we will. I want to, I mean, for many reasons, I want to revise that reserve policy. I keep bringing it back to this committee and, I'm doing it in a different approach this time, but it'll be a two meeting approach for sure.
Okay.
So this
But
is
I
just
did have,
a
I guess,
kickoff.
again, just for my base understanding. So when numbers are presented, for instance, 2024, does that mean fiscal year ending June 30, 24?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
the fiscal year is, I actually, you'll see in my reports that I usually go 23-24 so that you know exactly what fiscal year, because depending on what agency you're talking to, if they say 24, it could be the beginning of the fiscal year, or it could be the end of the fiscal year. And so this agency prior to me was only using one digit. And I go, oh, you guys, you're going to confuse me. So can we start talking, those two digits? Because then
Mhm.
it's really clear what fiscal year you're talking about. So
Mhm.
in my presentations, you'll see me use the beginning and the end when I talk about a fiscal year. So it's really clear. So
Okay.
we're currently in the 24-25 fiscal year, beginning July 1 of 24, ending June 30th of 25. And when I present the budget, you'll see multiple columns. You'll see the expense, the account number, the account name, current year budget, the current year current year to date actual, and current year estimate to close. That is the 12-month number that I have calculated for the current year. If I have a crystal ball, that's what I see how this current year will close. Then you've got the 2 proposed years after that. So the documents that I'll provide you will be like 3, 4, like 6 columns of numbers. Okay. But I think it's important to have that much information so that you have perspective.
And
Okay.
I noticed in the handout that was passed out to everybody, a week ago, that
Yep.
it refers to, you had mentioned the comp study, but it also mentioned a housing element study. And
Oh, that was just an example. That's in the
Oh.
PowerPoint. That was just an example
Okay.
of my PowerPoint of different things that can be in a budget. You guys are never going to have a housing element in your
Yeah, I was
budget.
thinking,
I am
really?
sorry. I saw that as I passed by in the PowerPoint. I said, oops, I could have taken
Okay.
that out of this PowerPoint.
So the ERP is also just an example. That's not
It
something.
is just an example of different
Okay.
things that could be in a budget. In your budget,
Okay.
it will not be. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
A comp study,
I was-
yes, right? We talked
Yeah,
about
so
how
that's
there's
why I
a
thought, okay, these
classic
are
comp. Yeah.
legit. Oh.
Yeah, some of them are legit. Some
Okay.
all agencies have comp studies at times, but you're
Right.
right. That is, you called me out. I took this PowerPoint and I tweaked it to make it a San Lorenzo Valley, and I messed up in a couple places and I should have changed those. You're right. Thank you.
Okay. No, it caught my eye and I just was curious. Okay.
Nope, I
Bad,
appreciate
Heather.
the questions.
Bad, Heather.
Okay.
Bad, Heather. Heather's trying to save you guys time and me not create a PowerPoint from scratch.
I'm just fine with that.
Yeah, I was gonna go, you don't want me spending the time to create PowerPoints from scratch if I can borrow and tweak.
No, that's right.
We
All
certainly
right.
don't want to have to pay you to do that.
You do not. And yeah. So I do my best to take what's, the wheel that's already been made and just adjust the spokes a little bit.
Yes.
Do you have any further questions on this item? I'd like, if possible, do we have any public that have any questions or comments? Is there anybody there?
There's nobody here in the room, and
2 people online, workforce. Garrett and Rachel are online.
yeah. Yeah, they're both employees. So,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. Then may I move on to the next item then?
Please.
All right,
Yes.
the next item is, and you'll notice that these items are items that you requested of me. I have a plan for all of the items that this committee requested of me, and next month I'll provide you in the packet a copy of my plan for the next year for agenda items for this committee. But these items are, you're keeping me on my toes for sure. But these items that are in this agenda are all items that were on that were requested by you, or things that just need to happen. What is before you is a report on your FEMA reimbursement update.
Mhm.
And what I've got is essentially, there is a receivable on the books for FEMA of 264,000. The board only, excuse me, the district, what we do is we recognize revenue and a receivable when FEMA obligates the money. And until FEMA obligates the money, it's not really for sure money that the district's going to get. There is a list of steps that FEMA has to go through before it obligates the money. And so of the obligated projects, there FEMA owes the district 264,000. Since, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. Maybe I misunderstood from last month's meeting,
Yeah.
but I guess with some of the things that Brandon was showing us with the dashboard, what is the hope for the total FEMA monies that we might get?
Well,
I thought it was millions, but yeah.
Well, it's millions, but we have to spend that money, or we have to get those projects approved. Those projects for that large quantity of money need to move forward in FEMA's eyes as well as the district's side before we can get that money.
Mhm.
Okay. And so next, what I've asked of FEMA, I think I even put it in here. I've asked Optum, Brandon's company, to provide me a cash flow. What is their estimated cash flow for the next 3 years, current year and my 2 budget years? Because committee, you guys asked me to include FEMA in my cash flow projection. Well, right
Mhm.
now, I don't have those numbers. And to be honest, I'm not going to put numbers in a cash flow or in a budget that are just guesses. To be honest, our budget this current year has 9 million or 6 million or some crazy large number that we're not going to get for sure. Okay. And I want the budget to be conservative, and I want it to be really close to accurate and something that the public can rely on, as well as the board and the employees. Okay.
So does that mean that, let's say, just to pick an easy number to play with, if we thought we would eventually get 5 million from FEMA over the next few years, I'm assuming that some of the capital projects we're already undertaking now those could be approved by FEMA, and in which case we're getting grant money for what we've had to use debt money to pay for.
Correct. So we're essentially getting reimbursed for
We're getting
that.
reimbursed.
And that is how it works. Okay. So
Very
you're
good.
going to see me present a CIP, or at least part of a CIP, in next month. And the funding source is going to say FEMA. And I'm going to tell you, well, when you see the word FEMA, think reserves, because it's not like we just have X, it's not like we can spend FEMA money. It's not like, for the most part, they're giving us a pot of money to spend. It's based on reimbursement. And as of right now, we're not getting reimbursed very fast. So therefore, we can't give our vendors an IOU. Oh, by the way, we'll pay you back when FEMA reimburses us. We don't get to do that. So we have to have a funding source other than FEMA. And so when you see FEMA, I'll be telling you, please look at those as reserves, because I can't count on that FEMA money right now. Okay.
Or if not reserves, loans.
Yeah, correct. Loans. But what I'm doing is I'm looking reserves. We don't have bond proceeds. We have very little bond proceeds left. And that money is spoken for. So that means the board either decides to go out for additional debt. And I'm hoping that that this proposed budget will inform the board as if that is needed or not. Okay. All right. But
We literally have some projects, for example, the 5 Mile pipeline and the Peavine pipeline, which those two by themselves are millions of dollars.
Right. Yeah, I noticed we had only about 3.5 million left in bond funds left. And so you're saying they're already spoken for, and we know.
I've got less than 700,000 right now,
Okay,
and
that's all
and they are
spoken
spoken for. It is completely spoken for. So
Yeah.
yeah, you'll see some mention of bond proceeds when we're talking about current year projects and the estimate to close on those projects next month, but nothing going farther out. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, but this
Yes.
report only talks about obligated projects because those are the ones that I can speak you know, with confidence that in the next year we're going to get 264,000. Okay. After that, I am working with Aptum to get better numbers and a better understanding of what is holding up the remaining of the money. Is it the district because we're not moving forward fast enough, or is it FEMA and it's just a matter of working through their approval process? Okay. I'm not going to present to you information that is only half baked. Okay. I won't do that to you, and I will do my best not to present numbers unless I'm confident in them. Okay. So this is my update for now. As I get additional information, or at least quarterly, I will provide additional information to you. Okay. All right. So if there's no questions regarding this, that concludes my report on the FEMA update. Is there anybody in the public? I want to make sure we're following Brown Act. No.
No public comment.
All right. All right. I believe the next item is the reserve policy. All right. I'm not asking for any action from the committee with this item at this point. Okay. I am asking for you to receive this information. We'll discuss it. And then what I want to do is, I'll explain later, but what I want to do is apply this proposed policy to my, to the information I'll present next month with the proposed budget, so that you can truly see how this policy would work and how it would impact your numbers. The board has been in multiple meetings made clear that they really want a very conservative reserve policy because of the disaster experience that they've gone through. We need to have reserves so that when, not if, but when the next disaster occurs, we have those reserves in place. Okay. So you will see this policy is I'd say a very conservative policy. I have looked since last presenting this, I have looked at many policies, and to be honest, I focused in the Tahoe area. Okay, because Tahoe experiences similar disasters to what this district deals with. And so I'm actually even in communication with the Tahoe Community Public Utility District because I was impressed with their capital reserve policy. And so I'm working with them, and that's actually what the capital portion is, where I'm kind of going, okay, how do you do that? How do you make those calculations? And working with them. And so again, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that is where I'm going. But here, let me start over. On June 7th of 21, the board adopted a resolution approving a reserve fund policy based on GASB 54. GASB 54 applies to governmental funds only. Remember what we just talked about over the last hour? We're not a governmental fund. We're an enterprise fund. We need a policy that works with governmental funds. Okay. So I think it's really important that we have one that applies to governmental funds or excuse me, to enterprise funds. Okay. The GFOA, I talked about them already, the Government Finance Officers Association. They recommend that enterprise funds adopt a target amount of working capital reserve to maintain in their enterprise funds. And depending on your own situation, depends on how much. Again, we just talked about how this district needs a larger one than most people to get us through those disasters when it happens. It is essential that the district maintain adequate levels of working capital in the funds to mitigate current and future risks. We talked about that. And to ensure stable services and fees, because if you have those reserves, then your rates aren't having to go giant bumps to cover operations, right? And that working capital, the definition of working capital is current assets minus current liabilities, okay? And your financial statements have those two numbers on them, okay? I actually included a copy of the fiscal year 23-24 financial statements. It's called the statement of net position, and it's essentially your balance sheet. If you're familiar with a business financial statements at all, you have a balance sheet, you have an income statement, and you have a statement of net equity. We have those same statements. They just have different names and look a little different, but the same sort of information is on them. But what I'm proposing is for this district to use an adjusted working capital, because included in our current assets are restricted funds such as unspent bond proceeds and fire surcharge. Fire surcharge is restricted to capital projects for the CZU fire. Unspent bond proceeds, like we mentioned earlier, there's a resolution that says you can only spend it on these capital projects. That's very restricted. So we don't want that to be included in working capital for your reserves. The current policy has 6 parts: an operating reserve of 37.5% of operating expenses, or about 4.5 months worth of reserves. The capital reserve, 2.5% of capital replacement value. And I'll say, and I'll admit that I've been struggling with the calculation of that capital replacement value. A government agency, whether a water district or a regular local government with a governmental fund, they don't calculate your capital replacement value on a regular basis. Okay, that's not something that's done. I will say Bajo Community Public Utility District has figured out how to do it. Okay, so I am again working with them on the best way to calculate that using our depreciation schedule. And so I am taking that a little farther. Again, the current policy also includes compensated absence reserve, 1/3 of the audited balance, the fire surcharge restricted balance, the debt service restricted balance, and the assessment district's balance. If an adjusted working capital was your basis, which according to GFOA it should be, the calculation of reserve would and debt service, if an adjusted working capital was the basis for calculating reserve, the fire surcharge and debt service balances would be eliminated as they are restricted funds. That's what we just talked about, how I want to use an adjusted working capital. And the current portion of compensated absence balance would already be included in the current liabilities and reducing that current asset amount. And the assessment districts, while not considered restricted on the city's, on the district's financial statements. I even had a chat with the auditor about that. There is nothing in their minds when they look at the assessment districts that they're restricted. I would say that the amounts are considered insignificant in the overall picture. So what I'm proposing is a simpler policy that is 60% of operating expenses, or 7.2 months, and a capital reserve of 50% of 1 year's annualized average capital replacement value. And I included a calculation, and I'm going to share my screen again. And oh, you guys don't want to see that anymore. I'm going to go to my desktop really quick. And right here. All right, so I included this document in your packet. And the top numbers are your current assets and current liabilities straight from your June 30th, 24 financial statements. And then we're reducing that by your debt proceeds and some fiscal agent amounts related to debts with a spelling error. I apologize. And your fire surcharge amounts. And then we're going to add back the current portion of long-term debt and accrued interest that are included in your liabilities, because those are also included in the budget. So we don't want to include them or duplicate them. And that would give you an adjusted working capital at June 30th of 24. For my proposed policy or draft policy, 60% of annual expenses, and I'm just going for the 24-25, would be 6 million. And the capital reserve, for illustration purposes only, I am still in the process of calculating that number, would be a total reserve of 8.5 million. The existing policy is looking at 7.3 million. So my proposed draft policy is actually a little more restrictive and conservative than the existing policy.
Conservative as in a bigger reserve.
It is. And again, this board is very concerned about having that money set aside for in case of a disaster, when the disaster hits. And so, and if this committee, when we get to this point, wanted to propose lower percentages, making it less conservative, we can do that too. But the main thing I'm trying to at least get across for this meeting is to simplify the policy down to those 2 line items, working with working capital. Okay, where that GASB 54 policy was looking at fund balance. You don't have a fund balance number anywhere on your financial statements. I was not able to calculate the numbers she used as starting reserve in her numbers, because it doesn't really apply. So in this case, it would apply, and it would be very clear, and it would be very consistent how other enterprise funds do their policy. So those are the 2 things I'd like to discuss today. Is 1, the use of working capital versus fund balance, and 2, the simplifying of the policy down to an operating reserve and a capital reserve without all of those other items that I think just complicate it for no reason. So that is where I'm at this point with the reserve policy, and we will continue the discussion next month. Again, when I'm applying it to the proposed budget, you can really see, and my goal is to have the calculation done in working with Tahoe Utility District on how to calculate that capital reserve properly.
So
I will
Heather,
say that other utility funds, in what I look, they just use a flat amount or base it on depreciation, their capital reserve. I'm not recommending that. I really think it needs to be based on something a little bit more substantive.
yeah, I really like the idea of basing it on replacement value. I mean,
Yep.
An asset, a pipeline that's been there for 40 years, it has almost no, its old cost has nothing to do with what today's
The replacement
cost
would be, yes.
Correct.
And
Yep.
just so I understand your illustrative numbers. So right now we have about 66 million in capital assets. And in your example of 2.5 million extra reserve, that sort of implies then $100 million replacement value, just to pick a number out of the air, right?
I can't say that I put that much thought in it. So 2,500 was what was used in
Oh,
prior years. And that's why I made it really clear. It is just so we could have apples to apples comparisons between the two policies.
Okay,
So,
yeah,
so I think, to use a somewhat crude term, we've all been smoking dope about what the actual replacement cost would be for the district's infrastructure here.
right.
Much of it is very old, but looking at what it's cost us to do certain projects, we're starting to talk hundreds of millions of dollars if we have to replace it all.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So what one of the things that I'm working with the Tahoe Utility District is construction cost indexing. Okay, and taking that construction cost index of when the pipe was put in the ground to what the construction cost index is now, and using that in the formula. And
Yes.
again, it's to get it started is some work, but I'm hoping that I can get this going. I've got it all. I'm getting there. I'm about halfway. So by April, we will have no problems. Jen, are we going to run out of meeting time? Are we going to run out at 4:30?
Yes.
We're trying to look to how we can extend it from being in the meeting right at the moment.
Okay.
I didn't realize it had a hard time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Zoom
When Jen popped
reservations.
on, I knew something was up, and I looked at the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
Heather,
the last item will not. I don't think the last item will take long. But I wanted.
The people that do the broadcast for us and record it and all have
That's their.
a set time that
That's
they're
their set
recording
time.
for.
I see.
Well, we do the committee meetings,
Yeah,
CTV does the board meeting, so this is.
Okay.
This is Jen's.
but either way, it's we're bumping into something here.
Because it was set for an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's not supposed to even go over an hour.
That's with Zoom.
See,
do we
my
want to try to
Zoom link.
squeeze in this last item in case we get cut off in
Yeah.
2 minutes?
Well, we got
Yeah, go for it.
like 3 minutes to go here.
Yeah, I do have this last item actually does have a recommended motion. Do you want me to start talking about it?
That's the RGS.
It's the RGS contract. Staff was asked to provide an amendment. We are actually running out of not to exceed funds. And so it is important that the amendment go to the board next month. The amendment is for an additional 25,000 to increase the not to exceed amount to 231,300. This contract did start in October of 23.
Yeah. So in my mind,
yes.
this is absolutely essential and a bargain, frankly.
Yep.
We suffered for having inadequate financial analysis for several years there, and she's done a marvelous job, and we are renting her by the hour basically. So I mean, it's a contract, so it isn't like we're not gonna lose her tomorrow for an extra hour or something like that. But
Right.
I know of no one in the district that has anything bad to say about this contract. So
I agree. I would,
Yes.
I don't have any questions. And as soon as we're done with questions, I'm happy to move to approve it.
It looked good to me too.
why don't you make your motion?
I move that we approve the resolution as recommended.
I second it.
Okay, I will take a vote.
All in favor?
Okay, Jeff Hill,
Okay.
Brian Largay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bob Ross.
Yes.
Mike Galvin.
Yes.
All right, so that passes. Thank you.
Ooh, just in the
And
nick of time.
regarding the reserve policy, I just want to throw that out there. That conversation will definitely continue next month. Okay. I wanted to at least present it as to what I'm proposing and give you an update of where I'm at.
Okay.
That's great. My only one comment, if we could circle back on that, is just that I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being that we want a larger reserve than we have typically carried. And we might need to phase that in over multiple years to build up to it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that
Yeah.
concept out there.
I love that idea. So,
So,
yeah.
so for perspective, for those that haven't followed this, after the CZU fire, we almost drained the bank account.
Not
There's
surprised.
overtime work and supplies and things that had to be rushed in and
Right.
things like that. We came very close to running out of money. So.
Yeah.
So that.
Lesson learned.
Yes, lesson learned. And it didn't help any to have just a couple of years later, have the floods along the San Lorenzo River, which also cost us a lot of time and money and work to cope with broken pipelines and things like that. So.
Well, at least we haven't been hit by a tornado. But
Yeah, we had
That'll
that down in Scottsdale.
that was in Scottsdale.
We did get enough wind damage that we have FEMA funded wind event
Really?
Oh, yes.
projects
Oh, yeah, we've
going
had-
right now.
We've had
Yeah,
trees uprooted and things like that. and-
Brick hit pipes.
stuff smashed by trees. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Okay, so I'm gonna move that we adjourn. So,
Second.
All right.
We're still on, it's 4:31, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so far,
Oh,
so good.
we're still on. Oh, okay.
well,
Yeah.
Getting a free.
But
a
Thank
free-
you all.
so we are now adjourned.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was really excellent.
Thank you.
Mhm.